Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Responsive Web Design 2. This is lecture 4. So today, if I unfreeze the screen here, there we go. Today we're going to be covering the assignment expectations. So you're going to be receiving your first exercise in this course. So I'm going to go through and explain a little bit about what I'm going to be expecting from you when you submit an assignment. Right, so we'll spend some time going through that, and then we'll talk about your exercise page redesign. Right, so it should be a pretty short lecture. You're going to have some time in class to work on this exercise. The only announcement I have is that the sign-in sheet is going around. Are there any questions before we get started? All right. Let's talk about the assignment expectation. So this will apply to any of the assignments being assigned in this course. Okay, not just the one coming up. So some of the topics we're going to be talking about for the assignment is we're going to talk about responsive layout. What do we mean by responsive layout? You've already had a whole term of responsive web design, so you should know what a responsive layout is. I'll go into detail about it again. We'll talk about good design versus bad design because you will be graded on your design on some assignments. So we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about well-formatted code. What do I mean by that? What am I going to be looking for? And what are my expectations? So let's talk about responsive layout. So everyone should know what a responsive layout is, but basically it means that a site or page remains functional, readable, and of good design, regardless of the size of the screen, the size of the window. Okay? So it doesn't mean it's exactly the same all the way through, but it means that it's still functional, still readable. Okay? We don't have elements overlapping each other. We don't have text that stretches really far, that it makes it really hard to read. We don't have text that's being shrunk down so you can't see it. Okay, that's what we mean by responsive. So it's important that all important elements should remain usable and readable. Okay, so when back in the day, when the whole concept of responsive web design came about, say 2010, we weren't really sure on how to handle this whole mobile revolution. So a lot of times what we did is we just stripped down the site, took out things that we didn't want, and just made it a very bare bones site. Okay, we don't have to do that anymore. Your cell phones, mobile phones are much more powerful now. They're capable of seeing everything that you want to show it. So we don't want to just hide things when we can't make it work. We need to think about the design and make sure it's all used. Okay, the layout shouldn't break. So when I test your projects, you submit your project, I'm going to be testing it through the full gamut of sizes. I will resize it up and down, and I'll be looking for any part where the layout might break, where something shouldn't have wrapped around when it did, or elements overlap on each other, okay? Or when things just don't look right. That's what I'm going to be looking for. That's what we refer to as layout breaks. If you come to that, that's a good indication of where you need a breakpoint, by the way. It's typically where you want to, when you're testing your site out, and you should be testing your site, you test to see where does it break. If it breaks at some point, that's where you should be putting a breakpoint. We don't need to be fixed on these hard breakpoints of, oh, I need a breakpoint for a mobile device. We need a breakpoint for a tablet. I'm not really too concerned about that. I'm more concerned with where does your layout break? That's where you need breakpoint. I'll talk about that more. No horizontal scrolling. Okay, I get this a lot when people submit. They'll submit a project, it looks good, but you'll see the tiny little horizontal scroll bar at the bottom. Very bad. Okay, it's just, even if it's not even scrolling that much, it's almost just a pet peeve of mine. So no horizontal scrolling. Make sure you don't have any horizontal scrolling. Okay. The use of media queries and breakpoints are not required. This is what I was just talking about. I'm not too concerned that you have okay, I want a breakpoint at 680, at 1024, and no. Put your breakpoints where you feel like you need breakpoints. You can build a website without any breakpoints, without any media queries. It can be done, and it still be completely responsive. With Flexbox and CSS Grid, that is possible. Okay? So they're only required if your design requires them. I'm not going to be looking for them. I'm going to be checking to see that your layout still works. So don't be too concerned about looking for specific or including media queries for the sake of including media queries or having breakpoints in there for the sake of having breakpoints. Only put them in there if they're necessary. And this is the last one, probably the most important one. This happens all the time. Do not forget your viewport meta tag. I won't believe how many students will give me a site. They feel like it's perfectly responsive because they're resizing their browser. Look, it works. But the moment I put it into a mobile device, it's just sizing it down, making it tiny. Okay? That viewport meta tag is vital to making your site responsive. It is absolutely necessary. Okay? So best way to make sure that this happens is when you create a new HTML page is to just use that Emmet shortcut because that automatically adds this tag for you so you don't ever forget it. Okay? Now for your first assignment, I am actually providing you the HTML so you don't have to worry about that for the first assignment. But moving forward, future assignments, you will be creating your HTML. So do not forget that viewport meta tag. That essentially will invalidate your responsive layout, and you'll likely receive a very low score for that section. Any questions about responsive layout, what I'm expecting? Okay, good design. All right, so next typical section that you'll be graded on is your design. And good design versus bad design generally will say something like this. I know it when I see it, right? I know good design when I see it. Well, that really doesn't very helpful, right? Design is very subjective. I'm one who does not like subjectivity. That's why I tend to teach more programming classes where I'm looking for functionality, and that's just check mark. Does it work or not? But with design classes, you do have to grade on design. So there are a few things that I'm going to be looking for about your design. First thing is simple. Now, this does not mean you need to have a simple design and that's better than a more complex design. It's don't make it too complex. And I'm going to show you an example of a too complex design. Okay, so keep it simple. Add lots of white space. You don't need to cram things in. Back in the 90s, that's the way websites used to be. But just like, let's cram in as much information as we can. And there's absolutely no white space, and you couldn't really read anything. Okay, so it's best to keep it simple. Consistent. You want to remain consistent. You want to maintain your colors be consistent, your fonts be consistent, your layout be consistent, both in page and across pages. Okay, so you want to remain consistent. Of course, websites are all about content. Content is king. Most of your content will be in the form of text. If your text is unreadable, if it's not enough contrast, if your font isn't big enough, if it's in some obscure font like Wingdings that is unreadable, that kind of defeats the purpose. Okay? So make sure your content is readable. And of course, make sure the design is appealing. Okay? This has to do with color choices, your fonts choices, whole imagery. Okay? Make sure it all looks appealing. Right, and flows well together. Intuitive. Okay, so your design should be intuitive. What does this mean? This means pretty much following what sites look like. Users are going to expect a site to look pretty much like every other site they've seen. It's boring, but that's the way the world works. Okay, so most users are going to be expecting navigation's going to be at the top. All right, they're going to look from left to right. That top corner is where it's going to be an important spot. So they're going to be expecting navigation likely on the top, maybe running down the side, okay, left side. main content in the middle. Okay. If you do some weird stuff like putting all your navigation at the bottom, so they have to scroll all the way to the bottom, get to the navigation, that's kind of intuitive. Okay. Or hiding the navigation where you have to click the button 3 times to bring it up. I don't know why you do that, but that's intuitive, non-intuitive. Okay. Users should not have to figure out how to use your site. Now, most of the stuff we're going to be doing in this course are relatively simple sites, so shouldn't be too much. All right, so here's some tips about having good design. No more than 3 fonts, 3 different fonts. Okay, you go beyond that, and that's just way too many fonts. You're changing your text way too much, and it breaks that whole consistency factor. Okay, so I highly encourage you do not have more than 3 different fonts. Utilize bold, utilize italics, utilize the different weights if you want to distinguish between hierarchy. Don't create new or don't add new fonts. Text should be between 50 and 70 characters long. Okay. If you have it too short, it makes it difficult to read. If it's too long, it's also difficult to read. So you want to make sure that your texts are between this. If you're running into too long of text, add some width to it or increase the font size. Okay, you increase the font size, the characters are bigger, you're going to get less characters per line. Have an obvious visual hierarchy. Okay. We still read websites like we did with books and outlines. We like to see headers be bigger than the text. It gives us it allows us to read through the site quickly and see what's important. Okay? So it's important to have that visual hierarchy. No more than 5 different colors. Okay? You add too many different colors, you run into, again, the consistency. You also run into assaults your eye with too many things, too much contrast, and you don't know where to look. Okay, so make sure your colors go well together and that you don't have too many different. Here's the colors should be complementary and have adequate contrast. Okay, if you have a background with black text, again, that's not enough contrast for anybody to read it. Okay, again, defeating the purpose. Right? So you need to make sure you have adequate contrast. Not everyone has the best eyesight, right? We're going to have people who are colorblind. They're going to have more difficulty seeing it. So we want to make sure we have adequate contrast and that our colors, again, complement each other. Layout and navigation should be familiar. This goes along with the intuitive talk. You want to, as much as it seems boring, you kind of want to follow what everyone else is doing because that's what people are used to. Okay? We don't want to have to train people how to use our site. They're not going to want to stick around. They have to learn how to use your site. They're not going to. All right, so here's some examples of some good websites. So the URL is available there. So this is website, Brittany Chang. I'm terrible with names. That's probably not how you pronounce it. But if you check out her website here, you can see that she even has a little animation. Don't feel like you need to include an animation on your. Well, we will be talking about animation, so you will need to include some animation. But you can see that she definitely has a color theme going on that she sticks with throughout. Okay, you can see she has good use of white space, not a whole lot of cramming everything in. And it looks much better on your screen than it does on this projector. I do apologize because it's actually kind of a blue background. Looks kind of nice. This is black on this projector. But you can see that she definitely has a whole theme going on it. It works well together. Again, lots of white space. And the animation enhances the layout. All right. So that's one. Here's another example. Again, slightly brighter colors, but again, sticks with the color theme. Brand makers. Also has animations as well. Again, they're going for the whole big fonts. That's pretty popular trend right now. Bigger fonts, you know, it kind of shouts at you. It also makes it easier to read on smaller devices as well. Okay, but you want to be careful about the amount of text per line. Again, you don't want to go too small on your mobile devices. I'm not a big fan of this, but that's still, they're sticking with their themes. Okay, we can see again they have pretty good use of white space. I think a lot of shouldn't say a lot of designers, but a lot of websites forget that they need to include white space. Okay, it's important to not have things everywhere. Helps break up your site. And this last one is Altastic. Again, whoops, I guess I didn't link that one. Okay, but anyway, you can take a look at that one. The URL is down. You can click here. There we go. Here's this last one. Altastic, again, with the animation. Animation is very popular about enhancing your websites. Again, good use of, you can see that she is using different fonts. So her headers are at this sans serif font, but the text is at serif font for her headers and a sans serif for her text. But they work well together. Okay? And she sticks with it throughout. You know, it's the whole color theme. She's not picking a whole bunch of different colors. She's sticking to just a few different colors and incorporating it throughout the site. Works well. So those are some examples of some good examples of websites. I'm going to show you a few not so good. All right, so this is the Yale School of Art. This is still out there. I just took this screenshot yesterday. By the way, this kind of reminds me of MySpace. Anybody remembers that? I don't even know what to say about it. I have no idea what's going on or why. But don't do this. Just don't. Okay? Here's another one. This one has horizontal scrolling. It goes on forever. Just keep scrolling horizontally and vertically. Goes both directions. So there was a site back in 2005 called the $1 Million Homepage. This kind of reminds me of that. You should look that up. Great, but yeah, they're just cramming. This is the whole too complicated, cramming way too much information into one page. You can't even tell where to look. And they have so many different colors, and it's just, yeah, don't do this. And now there's this page. This is gonna look familiar later on. This is your assignment, by the way. This is the site you're gonna be given. I designed this. Isn't it great? So this is the site you're gonna be given that you need to redesign. So we'll talk about this a little bit later. But you'll get stuff like this. But you'll notice that there are, just in this little bit of a screenshot, we have 3 different fonts being used. They have text in this cursive font, which you should almost never do. In fact, just never use cursive at all. Awful. You can see right here, there's not enough contrast between this color, this background color, and this forward color, and it's just, the color choices are horrendous. Seriously. Person who ever made that. But again, we'll talk about this later. Okay, so those are designs that you shouldn't be doing, and designs you should. All right. Okay, so that's enough of design. Let's talk about well-formatted code. So you will be graded on how well your code is formatted. It's not a whole lot of points of your assignments, but it is enough to make sure that you want to be paying attention to it. So along with well-formatted code, you need to include thoughtful comments throughout your code. Okay? We're going to encourage you using more comments than you maybe would in the real world. This is mostly because I want you to tell me what you are doing and why you did it for your code. Okay? So when you add a CSS block, a definition inside of CSS, I want you to explain what that definition is for. I want you to explain why you chose to use these styles. Okay? Again, this is more for education. This is let me know that you know what you're doing. You want to have consistent indentation. right? There is a structure to code. We like to tab things over and line them up. It makes it much easier to read. I'm going to show you some examples here in a moment, okay? If you just kind of random tab and hit returns whenever you feel like it, your code's going to look like a mess. You might be able to read it, but nobody else is, right? And you're not going to be working alone all your entire career. You want to make sure that your code is easy to read. You want to have consistent naming, and you want to make sure you have appropriate file and folder structure. Okay, and I'll talk about these all a little bit more detail. So, commenting. This is an example of bad comment. Okay, this does nothing. Okay, yeah, this is adding a comment, but they're not really telling you anything. Right? So you want to tell me something, okay? This is not perfect commenting, but this is a little bit better, right? This is telling me what the page header is going to be doing. It's going to remain consistent throughout all the pages, and that you chose the main tag because you want to be more semantic rather than just a plain div, okay? This is at least telling me something about it, right? Here's an example with CSS. Again, not telling me anything. Not good. This is bad comment. Okay, better comments would be explaining that the container will create a 4x3 responsive grid, or that I'm using FlexGrow because I want my cells to fill the available space. Okay, that is explaining me, telling me why you're doing it, telling me that you do know what you're doing. Okay, would you do this in real development? Absolutely not. Okay, this is not for real development. This is for education. Okay, so in consistent indentation, this is what not to do, okay? Don't write your HTML like this. This is impossible to read. You can't see the hierarchy. You can't see what's inside of what. Much better example would be like this, okay? So anytime you have a child element, you tab it over. That creates a visual hierarchy of your page. That's what we want to see. Okay, with CSS, this is valid, by the way. You could write your CSS like this. It will compile just fine. Can you read it? Not so much. Okay, so this is bad. You want to make sure you read it. Want to tab everything over. Each rule should be on a single line, or be on its own line. Rules shouldn't be sharing lines. You tab it over inside of your selector so that you can tell them apart. All right, so consistent naming. So I'm going to focus mostly on CSS here for classes and IDs. First off, I'm going to tell you right now, don't use IDs unless necessary. So for the page redesign, you are going to need to use IDs for that because I'm providing them for you. But in most cases, you should not use IDs for CSS. Only use your classes. So when you're creating classes, you want to make sure that you're consistent with your naming. You can see here that we're using all sorts of different conventions. We have camel case at the top. We're using dashes for the ID. We're using underscores for that class, along with capitalization for some reason. So all different ways. The reason why we don't want this inconsistency is it makes it more difficult to know what our class name is going to be. Okay, do we capitalize here or do we lowercase? Do we use underscores? All of that matters. All of that's important. So when you're saying consistent, it makes it much easier to remember your class name or your D name. Okay, so a better way would be like this, where we're keeping consistent. We're using dashes, which is what I would recommend. Use dashes between your words, using all lowercase for your class name. All right, file and folder names, structure. So when you're creating your files, you should be in all lowercase. Okay, do not capitalize any of your file or folder names for your websites. This is very important because on servers, on your local machine, there's no distinguish between uppercase and lowercase. But on a server, there is. So when you have a capitalized say you have a capitalized index.html and a lowercase index.html. Those are actually two different files, and the web server is going to read those as two different files. Right? So we don't want to get that confusion. So we want to make sure that we have them all lowercase. You want to avoid numbers inside of your file and folder names. That just complicates things. I'm not saying you can never have them, but try to avoid them. There's generally very little reason to have them. No spaces. You should not have spaces in your folder name or file names. Again, when you're dealing with the web, having spaces in those names cause all sorts of trouble for you. So just don't do it. If you need to add indication of different words, either use a dash or an underscore. And whichever one you choose, make sure you stay consistent with it. Make sure you use extensions like .html, .css. This is pretty self-explanatory. Your site won't even work if you don't have those. Again, be consistent with using dashes or underscores. I just mentioned that. And make sure your site's homepage is index.html. I have had students in the past will submit in a project and they'll use home.html or firstpage.html or something other than index. It's very important to use index because that is what the server is going to look for as the home page, right? For the servers that we use, okay? There are other servers out there that do have different home pages, but the ones we use, it's going to be index.html. So all of your home pages should be index.html. All right. Any questions about the assignment expectations? That kind of gives you an overview of what I'm going to be looking for. When we go through page redesign, which we're going to be doing here, I will also go over the rubric for that. I'll show you what the rubric looks like, and then you can see how that ties into what I just went. Before we go into that, are there any questions? All right, let's talk about page redesign. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to use CSS to improve the design of the web page. I showed you what that looks like. You should be able to do that. Not sure you can make it any worse. So you will not be able to, or you do not change the index.html or the base.css. So there is a base.css in there, and there's an index.html, and you're not allowed to change either of those. You're going to be doing all of your work in the style.css file. Now, selectors must have, the selectors you provide inside of style.css must have a higher specificity than those in base.css. Okay, so this is partly a specificity assignment. So remember bad piggies from Tuesday? Same thing. Okay, you're going to be having to work across that. Now, this is not going to be as difficult as bad piggies as far as specificity. I didn't make it that bad. I did add a little bit of work, but it's not going to be as troubling. The page should be responsive and well designed, as we just went over. When you're done, you will submit just style.css. You're not going to be submitting the whole site, just the one file that you're editing. And this is going to be due Thursday, January 23rd. Okay, so 1 week. All right, so let's take a look at that. If you go out to the course website, so course website, mdac.github.io/mtm6201-w20, and go to the content page. And if you go to the week 2, Cascade and Inheritance, that's what we're on. And we want to look at the page redesign under assignments and exercises. All right, so there's a little bit of an introduction and talks about the objective. You can see the requirements, which is basically what I just talked about. There is a starter files to download. So when you click on this, it's going to download a zip file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And we'll take a look at that here in a moment. Inside of that file, you have an index.html, a base.css, a style.css, and an images folder that contains the one image on the page. You will be making all of your changes, again, to the style.css. That's the only thing you are going to change. You will not change anything else. Then it'll go forward that we need to make sure you have valid and well-formatted CSS, that you're using the minimum specificity required, and that you provide comments. You're going to make sure that your page is responsive and that it is functional. Right? So those are the requirements. The rubric. This is the rubric I'm going to be using to grade this. So they're split up into different categories. So we have layout, design, specificity, CSS, and comments. You can see the points that you can achieve based off of the quality of work. Okay. And it is a total of 50. Okay. And then you'll submit to Brightspace, like we mentioned. All right. So if you've already downloaded the zip file, we can go ahead and open that up. So right here, I'm going to move this over to my MTM6201 folder. Okay, so I'm going to move my project over there that I just downloaded. And if you want, I do recommend actually to rename this. Okay, because this is quite long and we don't have to deal with that super long name. So let's just change this to Page Redesign. You're not going to be submitting this whole folder anyway, so there's no trouble renaming it. Okay, so again, if you download the zip file, move the folder once you've extracted it, move the folder over to your MTM6201 folder, and you can rename it to just Page Redesign. Then go ahead and open that up into Visual Studio Code. And you can take a look at the files. I've already gone through what the files are going to be in there. But again, you'll have an images folder, which will contain a single image. You have the base.css file, which contains the base CSS. That's the CSS that's already being applied to the site or to the page. You have the index.html for the HTML. There's the README file, which contains the instructions for the assignment, if you wish to look at those. And then you have style.css. This is the file that you're going to be making changes to, and it is empty. Okay, so everything you're going to be doing is going to be done in this file. Now, I do want to make a note inside the index.html. If you look, the style.css is coming before base, and that's where we're talking about the specificity. You are going to have to choose a higher specificity than what is in base because you need to make sure you override it. You're not going to be able to rely on coming after base. Okay? Just again to work with specificity. If you wanted to take a look at this project, you can run it through Live Server. So hopefully everyone installed Live Server during the first week. It was one of the required extensions. If not, let's go. I'm going to go through right now and show you how you can do that. Easiest way to install Live Server, if you don't have it, is to go to the extensions bar. Let me make this bigger. Okay, go to the extensions view. Right, so in the task action bar, right here is the extensions view. You can click on that. All right, you might see a different view here, but you'll should see a list of enabled, recommended, and disabled extensions. Above that is a search box. You can do a search for the extension. So we want to do a search for Live Server. And if you type that in, it should be the top one, Live Server. We can click on this. This will take you to the live server page. If you do not have it installed, there will be a button here that says install. You just click the button to install it and you're good to go. If you already have it installed, you will see disable or uninstall. Once you have live server installed, you will be able to use it to run any of the sites that we're working on in this course, which I'm going to show you how to do here in a minute. All right, so once you have live server installed, you can go back to your Explorer view. Again, that's the two little files. And then right-click on index.html. If you right-click on it, you'll get a context menu, and at the very top, it will say Open with Live Server. Okay, again, we just right-clicking on index.html, and in the menu, we'll have Open in Live Server. If we select that, it's going to open this file, this site, into your default browser. Now you can choose to open, you can choose your default browser. You can change your default browser through the live server extension. And this is the site that you have received and that you need to redesign. All right, so again, how to redesign it. You are going to be making changes. Whoops, wrong direction. Lost file here. You are going to be making changes to style.css. Okay, so if you want to make a change, you need to check to see what you want to change. So let's see what we want to change. We want to change the nav. We don't like the brown for the nav. If we wanted to do that, we might want to look at base.css to see what it's using. Well, you can see that it's using the ID of nav to affect the change, to set the background color. So remember that we're going to have a higher specificity. Again, going back to bad piggies. So we might have to choose something higher. Okay, so we can do, say, nav. Hashtag nav. And then we can make its background color, I don't know, white. Okay. So then when we save that, we can go back to the site and we can see that it is white. I don't think you want to go with white, by the way. But that's your choice. Any questions about this assignment? Again, you'll have the remaining time in class to work on this, and it is due next week, next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. All right. Okay, so that's all I've got. So I'm just going to wrap up here. I'm going to give you the rest of the time to work on your page redesign. So for next time, we are going to be covering Flexbox. Should be exciting. I love Flexbox. So we're going to be covering the Flexbox layouts and how to use that. We will have a participation exercise, Flex blocks, okay, that you will be working on. Any final questions before I wrap up? All right, that's all I have. Go ahead and go to work, and we'll see you on Tuesday.